Hi, I'm Latoya Dennis with WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, and welcome to another installment of Listen MKE Live. Listen MKE is a partnership between WUWM, the Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Milwaukee PBS, and the Milwaukee Public Library. Today, we're tackling the subject of police reform. It's been 1 year since a Minnesota police officer kneeled on the neck of George Floyd for more than 9 minutes, murdering him. After the video was released, protests across the country erupted. While Floyd was the catalyst, people in Wisconsin, and more specifically Milwaukee, took to the streets to also protest injustices here. While for some the fight is new, Black people have been fighting against police brutality for decades. Joining us today to talk about the continued fight for racial justice being waged, both in the streets and in the state capitol, we have Democratic State Representative David Bowen, and we have activist Vaun. And I guess I'm going to throw it to you, Vaun, because you kicked all these protests off here a year ago today. Well, not a year ago today, but around a year ago. You had the first protest. What were you hoping to accomplish?
Well, one, I appreciate you acknowledging that. That's a bit of history that a lot of people may not know that through my platform of Comforce, we threw the first event or rally here, which I intended to be a solidarity moment for Milwaukee and the state in general. I knew a lot of people wanted to go directly to Minnesota to get involved in the protests and the things that were happening in Minnesota at the time. And so to kind of deter that, because I didn't want people getting caught up in a lot of the stuff that was going on out there, I would rather have thrown something here. And knowing that at some point protests would start here around the issue of what happened with George Floyd. So I wanted to create an environment where we can stand in solidarity, but also bring it back to the George Floyds of our own city, which we had at the time, the Joseph Mensa thing going on with Alvin Cole's case. We had just right then at that time, Joel Acevedo's death, and so many other cases that have happened here before that people are still trying to get justice for. So we have to bring it back and let people know, yes, we stand in solidarity. This is wrong. We agree with all of that. But we have our own George Floyds here in Milwaukee that we still need justice for. And then additional to that, starting us off with a list of demands, because a lot of times we start these protests, and I didn't want us to be focused on what was happening in Minnesota. Minnesota has tremendous groundwork going on that has done a lot, and I didn't want us to be left fighting for that cause and still be left with our issues still here in Milwaukee. So I started us off with a basic list of demands. That list of demands have been carried on and have grown. Other organizations, other grassroots organizers and activists have joined in and come forth with their list of demands. So that was my intent. And it has, it turned into something really, really beautiful. It took a tragedy, it took a lot of chaos, and then it turned it and molded it into something that has gone almost an entire year since that day.
So let's talk about that list of demands. I'm wondering, have you all seen any success?
So I was sitting here just thinking about you preparing to ask a question like that. And I feel like we have, so much has come out of those lists of demands, but then so little has come as well. Starting that list of demands and that rally led into the creation of TPR and a lot of other things that have happened. Conversations that I had with some of the Republicans on these issues turned into the task force, which directly came from our conversations in our original list of demands, along with the Council of Floyd. But then I felt like there was some hijacking and some diversion going on. A lot of those list of demands have not been met. A lot of that list of demands has been redirected into what other people think it should be and look like. We've had conversations about what these different budgets, these different pots of money that's coming in and out of the city. So I feel like although If you ask TPR and a lot of people who've been directly involved, there are some wins, there are some changes. Tulsa is one huge change I could see and say that a lot of people from the city of Tulsa joined in on the cause, have been part of that battle to try and change the culture of what's going on in Tulsa. So that moving forward turned into the body cams out in Tulsa and a bunch of different other things that they police and fire commission and city council have done to answer some of those demands. But now we have these senators and the county council, all of them doing their own versions of what the list of demands stated, which I don't feel is adequate or that directly addresses or impacts those things that we asked for. So although I can say we've had some progress and some wins, we are nowhere near where that list of demands was supposed to take us.
Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, when you say TPR, I believe you're referencing the People's Revolution, correct?
Yes, the People's Revolution. I apologize.
Oh, no, no worries. I'd like to bring in Representative David Bowen
Oh,
because,
thank you for having me.
yeah, thanks for joining us. So, in talking about progress, right, and talking about the list of demands, there are some bills circulating in Madison right now, right? Can you talk a little bit about what's happening?
There are a few, and to be clear, it should have been a all-out focus on police reform, not just this year, but going back to when the governor originally called for a special session to take up these bills, 9 bills that he got from a number of different groups, Democrats and Republicans, from the state legislative black caucus. Some of the ideas even came from law enforcement that they agreed to, and the Republican leadership of the state rejected outright all of those bills, and then had conversations to do a half committee, a half task force, not with the Senate, but only in the Assembly. And then they dragged on that process, and were very clear in their creation of it that it was only to delay any progress on this issue. So you have a number of bills that are being brought to the state. Bills from Senator Weingard and Senator Taylor, bills from the task force on racial disparities. In total, you're probably looking at about maybe around 15 or so, 12 or so bills that are out there right now. And that excludes the bills that are being brought forward by my Democratic colleagues, like Lakeisha Myers, to ban no-knock warrants. That also leaves out the bill on qualified immunity with Representative Supreme Moore Makunde and Representative Jonathan Brostoff. It excludes one of the bills that's really important, and that's to protect the sanctity of life and to ensure in state statute officers are held to a higher standard. These bills also add into the number, and then you have a number of bills that completely and topics that are being left out on purpose from the task force. So unfortunately, we don't have that all-out focus to really get to the root of the issue.
Now, I should say that if you are watching this broadcast and you'd like to submit questions, please do. You can put them in the chat and we will try our best to get to those. So I want to go back to Vaun for a second, right? Because we were talking about this list of demands, and you said there's been some progress, and this leads into Bowen. But I'm wondering, what is it? What are, I guess, a couple of the most important things that you all have asked for that you haven't seen any movement on?
Well, I'll say this. I'll say that we have accomplished a lot, but I feel those accomplishments are under direct fire from every aspect. We got rid of an ineffective and detrimental police chief, so some of those list of demands had to do with accountability when it came to the killings of people like Joel Acevedo, Alvin Cole, and so although some of those led to charges. We're still going through things like, we're going through things such as the non-release of the video in the Acevedo case and the non-firing of Joseph Mensah and things like that. But in its place, we did get rid of an ineffective and detrimental police chief. That has now turned into a judge trying to help him force his way back onto the force as a chief if the city does not pay him lawsuit fees to his demands in a forced timeline, which I didn't even know was possible. I didn't know you can tell somebody you need to pay them by 45 days. I did not know that that was even possible. But we also now have senators writing bills directly detrimental and negatively impactful to the people in city of Milwaukee, specifically legislation meddling in the affairs of how our Fire and Police Commission is run, putting police in neighborhoods in cop houses when we have strained levels of trust and transparency with law enforcement already that have not been fully addressed, which is also speaks to that list of demands, and even threatening laws that enable them to defund Milwaukee if Milwaukee follows one of the list of demands that law enforcement be defunded. And this is done prominently by Republicans, prominently by white males, and predominantly white Republican males who do not represent Milwaukee nor its people or interests. I don't understand how a party that has historically denounced, opposed, and even flat out denied the issues of people of color have been championing not just recently, but even to this day. They have now taken a front seat to the conversation on what changes they are saying we need. And it's, it just speaks to a whole level of everything that we asked for. They found a way to penalize people for even considering entertaining those demands. We're calling for more accountability, and they're calling for more police to be put on what's supposed to be a community oversight, citizen oversight board, which is the Fire and Police Commission. They want the police union to now have input on and suggest names of law enforcement related people to go onto this board. It's just ridiculous that literally most everything that we've asked for, even some of the things that have geared towards going that way, they have found a way now to ask and push legislation that will be totally opposite of that. And that also includes stuff like qualified immunity.
Representative Bowen, as the lone lawmaker here on this discussion, right? How do you respond to that? What do you see happening?
Well, there's a complete just watering down of real solutions that get to the root of the issue. Maybe because it's too uncomfortable to talk about, too uncomfortable to actually deal with. But the reality is that we have essentially these stakeholders at the state, these lawmakers at the state that are refusing to address the real root causes of a officer making a decision on his own to be judge, jury, and executioner. And what we have right now are a number of bills coming from a task force that was created to address racial disparities in a way to acknowledge that these things are happening to more so people of color, more so the Black community and brown community. And instead of actually proposing legislation that would do what people are asking to be done, for instance, banning no-knock warrants, is a difference between a 30-second early start and busting into someone's home unannounced and pointing firearms at them, and which led to the death of Breonna Taylor. And instead of banning no-knock warrants, the task force decided to study them, right, to collect data, instead of actually taking police officers out of school environments. The task force makes a suggestion to train school resource officers. There is a complete disconnect of what people are truly asking for. And even when you look at the charging decisions that are being made in these cases, there was no real focus of removing the control to charge. We don't allow police departments to investigate themselves when there's a police involved shooting. and we shouldn't allow the very close relationship between a local DA and the same police department to continue to exist and not acknowledge the conflict of interest there, to be able to make the decision if a charge needs to be warranted. So there was no discussion. There was no take up of the issue of removing that decision from DAs so that it can be switched to a control outside of that local DA, whether that be a judge, whether that be another DA. Those conversations weren't had. And it feels like it took 7 months plus for us, where people were marching every day. Energy was very high. Millions of people are in the streets and demanding change. And the result is that we get to this point of actually having action only to be told we're not going to take a step forward. We're not going to take a leap forward. We're going to think about maybe stutter stepping on this issue to be able to move forward. So it's insulting with some of the things that are being suggested, and some of the solutions that are at the table right now. Of course, you should do them. Of course, there should be the use of force policy for every police department in the state of Wisconsin to be on a website. Fine, that's a good idea. Of course, these use of force policies need to be accountable, and that every officer that is trained in our state needs to prioritize de-escalation, needs to prioritize not changing the level of force from a 1 to a 10 and straight to lethal force, and skipping over steps 2 through 9. There are some things that are no-brainers, but also this issue is so urgent, and you have a response from legislators at the state where they're so scared and cannot find the courage to have more accountability on our police departments, on our police personnel, that it just looks like they're scared. It looks like they're actually going to miss this moment of what people are demanding. And then it would be put back on voters to vote in a new legislature in 2022 that actually will find the courage to address these things. There would be no other option for people to turn to if they are looking for change, if they are looking for those who are ready to do what it takes to make sure that we get to the root of this issue.
So when it comes to the no-knock warrants that you mentioned earlier, Representative Bowen, I believe the Speaker's Task Force on Racial Disparities, I think that's the name of it, basically came back and said, hey, we don't know how often these are used. We don't know, we have no information about them. And so therefore, we don't want to ban no-knock warrants because we don't know how often they're used. We don't know who they're used on or for. It sounds like you disagree with that.
That's a flat out lie. And I can't stress it enough. Everything that's done in government, there is a record. Everything that is, and I see Vaun shaking his head, and I love Vaun's energy. Everything that is done is not done without the permission, especially with a no-knock warrant where you have to go to a judge. There are records on these things. Whether they decide to collect those records or not is their decision. And it is not for us to be mad that they didn't collect the information. We know who is affected by no-knock warrants. It is not rich white men in this state that have their doors knocked down in the middle of the night with SWAT teams busting through their door with firearms pointed at their children. We know that's not happening to them. It's happening in Black and brown communities throughout our state. It's happening in Milwaukee. It's happening in our neighborhoods. And we have to ensure that we are not being so frivolous with this perspective that we are not going to get at the real root of what we know that has to be done. There are decisions being made for poor Black and brown people that aren't being made for white people, that aren't being made to put their same lives at the same risk that we have. But we have a front, in a sense, as if we just need to know, as if we just need to get data. And we're tired of data. We're tired of studying things. We know the answers. We know what can prevent these situations from happening, what can prevent these lives from being lost.
Can
No,
I interject?
yeah, I was going to say it. I was coming to you.
Listen, this is why there are levels to this, and people shouldn't be making decisions on stuff that they don't have any experience or knowledge of anyway. I mean, a lot of this stuff that they're making decisions of, they have no direct knowledge. They haven't been through this stuff, but they're telling us what's best for us in them situations. I myself was almost killed in a no-knock warrant in 2016. A lot of people know about my legal situation, but what they don't know is initially started off with a warrant that apparently was signed that was for my electronic devices. They did not have a no-knock warrant, and they did not have a forced entry enabling warrant, and they did exactly that. They came 7 o'clock in the morning while I was still asleep. They kicked my door in, charged in with no signia or anything that would tell me waking up out of bed. These are law enforcement agents. These are federal and all these other different type of people coming in with regular gas station bandanas around their face and assault rifles and all the type of weapons like that. And the first thing that I did, because this is kind of what I do in a situation like that, is I grabbed my phone to go live. So had there not been other people in that house, had I been there myself and only myself, I would have been directly in the line of fire, and I probably would have been shot and killed for picking up my phone. So I have direct knowledge, and I know why they should not be able to do that, especially when you're telling somebody that they're a witness or something as simple as we're coming in, we think you filmed something and you have evidence on what happened during the riots. So we want that instead of coming knocking on my door and asking me that, or instead of calling my phone, which a lot of them have my number, they watch my Facebook. Instead of doing any of those things, they decided to go get a warrant and able to burst in on me in the wee hours of the morning and almost kill me. And that's something that passed me at the time, but now that this is a real conversation, I know what that's like, and it literally could have been me. So that we don't need them to research it. This is happening. There are people that talk about this all the time. There's video of it. Aiyana Jones, 7 years old, killed by police bursting in the wrong house, shooting her in the head, killing her, and throwing a flashbang grenade on the couch she was sleeping on and causing her covers to be set on fire. That's unacceptable. We cannot allow for things like that to happen. And I feel like so much as this resistance comes from people who feel like if they take these tools away from law enforcement, that's not supporting law enforcement. Well, I beg to differ. If you keep law enforcement out of these situations where they take lives like this unnecessarily, you not only keep them from needing mental health and trauma needs after they take the life of somebody, especially somebody who didn't deserve it. You return some of that trust that you continue to take by allowing these things to go on. So people will trust that law enforcement is pulling them over and it's okay to pull over and just do what is necessary. You will protect them you would protect everybody by putting these things in place. And so that attitude that anything that you do or take from law enforcement is a knock against them or not supporting them, I beg to differ.
Vaun, let's keep going with this line of discussion, right? Because you talk about removing police officers from these situations. The question is, what's the alternative then? Right? How do we respond? Because we know that oftentimes police are called for lots of situations where possibly somebody else could be doing that.
Well, there are models that are happening, and I'm gonna just keep it real. A lot of this stuff has been taken not only from myself but people before me. You had the Khalil Coleman and the Safe Zones initiative. You had Comforce and the community patrols. You have 414 Life, who are intervening proactively in situations that if these situations were happening when no one was around or no one was intervening, they would be shootings, non-fatal and fatal shootings. These would be assaults and calls for service. Our work in Sherman Park showed that, where the Sherman Park itself, and anybody can look this up. When we first got there, we were told by law enforcement that they couldn't even respond to other places because they were getting 5 to 6 service calls there a day, to the point where they either had to come there that many times or just station themselves in the park all day long. We took those service calls all the way down to pretty much zero. You can't tell me that's not something that works. Or why would you not support that and continue to find ways to duplicate that rather than not supporting, feeling like you don't want to support me by not supporting it? You go and try to duplicate it, but duplicate it with the same methods that we just changed to make it work. There are definitely examples of what is working out there and what can be done, that people just continue to go back to the status quo. They try to come at you and make you water down what you're doing to make it not effective. Again, man, it just seems to me like either we don't want to make this work, or we're going to continue to work off politics where people are just if you're not part of these systems or you can't be controlled, then they're going to keep doing things the way that they're doing them. And that's a huge part of the problem, whether we're talking politically or day-to-day violence in our communities. We've had one of our former police chief candidates, and I believe even maybe the one we currently have, who have said police officers should not be responding to calls that have to deal with people who are in are changed, or I want to say mental health, people with mental health issues. Those should be professionals or a different group of folks answering those calls. You cannot put law enforcement with somebody who's having a mental breakdown or a lapse or anything like that. It's shown that they just don't have what it takes to deal with those situations properly, other than using force. And so again, are we going to continue to do the same thing, or are we not? Are we going to continue to look into non-police or non-armed responses? I have a community first responder model that has been taken that part from, but not done in its totality. And it just isn't impactful or works the way that it's supposed to, because people just refuse to support. And so, yeah, that is a huge conversation.
I'm going to bring Representative Bowen back in on this, and I'm going to ask you, so where do you think we go from here?
I think much of the answers that we're looking for, it's rooted in the people that are affected by it. And the solutions that we've seen to try to create the table where those solutions are discussed, so many times we have an effort to have a over representation of folks in law enforcement to be able to have this conversation, to be able to talk about these solutions. At the end of the day, we know that when it comes to shifting this system, we have to have conversations holistically. We have to have conversations rooted in prevention, rooted in evidence-based practices. And, I think that's what the struggle is when you see legislation for placing, paid officers into a house, into a neighborhood, rather than putting a family into a house in a neighborhood. What makes a neighborhood more safe? What prevents crime? It is people that actually have a place affordable and quality to live. It is ensuring that residents are looking out for each other and that they are creating a community that will counter the things that we're starting to see. It is not rooted in feel-good responses or knee-jerk reactions to be able to find solutions of what they think will actually address this issue. When people talk about defunding, they are looking at the reality that the city of Milwaukee spends almost 50% of their city budget on policing, period. And that when it comes to how much that we have, the resource that we poured into neighborhoods, we unequivocally put an onus to put as many resources as necessary, or whatever is deemed possible, for policing or criminalization, but not when it comes to actually community resources and community-based investments that will keep people in their homes, that will give people access to the services that they need, the resources that they need to live, work, and play. We are talking about a complete shift in public safety. And unfortunately, the conversation is attempted to be controlled by folks that are already having access to control, already having access to budgets and dollars. and there no longer can be an option to be accountable to a community, especially as we talk about the dynamic that has made it worse when officers don't live in the communities that they actually are working in. So, we're talking about really dramatic shifts that we need to be able to see. And I've had really good conversations with the League of Martin. I've had really good conversations with officers on the force that get it, that want to progress the history of policing in this country and in our communities, and they realize that especially as I look at my mentors, as I look at my former pastor, my pastor who was a former police officer, and him and his wife served 20 plus years on the Milwaukee Police Department, never shot anybody, never killed anybody. And there's so much is a hesitance to demand a higher standard of our officers who are paid with our dollars to be able to say that we can make a shift where our police department doesn't have to be a force that kills people, but it can be a force that actually serves people. That has to be at the foundation of what we're talking about. And some of the solutions that I see being presented right now aren't really getting at that. And I think you're going to see a number of different bills come to the legislature, whether they are given the time of day or not. The Republicans have made their decision that they are not going to treat this issue with the seriousness that it deserves, and they will have to reap the repercussions of that at the ballot box. But at the end of the day, the real solutions will be presented. It is a question if they will be supported, if they will be allowed the chance to be voted on, and if they will be allowed the chance to actually give in the debate that they deserve.
Now, Representative Bowen, you just mentioned Republicans, right? But a lot of what's making it through Madison right now does have bipartisan support, correct?
Sure. Instead of going a mile, if we all walk down the block, that's easy. So you're going to find support for, like I said, the basic things that need to be supported. Regardless, it shouldn't take a task force to go agree on the simplest things, and that's what finally gets signed into law. And to find bipartisan support, we need to be courageous. Even on violence prevention, we should be talking about tens of millions of dollars being invested in violence prevention all over the state. Unfortunately, we can't have that conversation because there is a hesitance in finding the resources. There's a hesitance in supporting the solutions that we know that are back in our neighborhoods with folks that have the relationships, have the connections to, and the credibility to be able to handle those disputes happening all over our community, to actually pour the resources into mental health and homelessness. How many times have we seen Black men die in parks, in our community, die while sleeping in a public space that they should be able to exist in? Too many times we continue to see the option for so many Black and brown people to be treated in a way in this community where they should be used to, according to this system status quo, and they should be used to treatment because they are Black, because they live in certain neighborhoods. And we've had those debates. One of the biggest things I really want to stress that I agreed with at the time, Chief Flynn, was that there were demands being placed on police officers to handle situations that they weren't trained for. So the first thing that we should do is make sure that they don't even have to be the staff, they don't have to be the personnel to handle those situations. And in so many instances, you can see that you don't need an armed officer to actually respond and handle those things. And I would say that there are much more important, much more critical things for armed law enforcement to handle. The most dangerous situations for law enforcement are domestic violence situations, and and no-knock warrants. And we continue to see, instead of focusing on where that someone that's trained to be able to handle situations, that's armed for them to go handle the most important ones, we still have this perspective where police need to be the one handling community programs, or they need to be the ones that are doing some of the, just, I would say, mundane things that they really shouldn't be tied up dealing with. We have some really important things happening in our community that we need the best trained professionals to be able to handle. And it's very critical that if we are going to reach this breaking point of reaching the real solutions that will address it, it means that we'll have to have some bold conversations to say, how do we fund other things? How do we also address the fact that the officers that we have need even medical aid training in situations to even keep the person alive that they had to use force on. These are conversations that need to be had, but we can't hinder them anymore. Cowardice can't be allowed to just have its way, and we don't do the things that we know that are necessary. We don't talk about the things that we know that are necessary.
I have one more question for the both of you before we wrap up here. And it's one that's hopefully a little more hopeful. And that is like, what are you looking forward to? Like, what's keeping you out there in this fight, and what are you looking forward to? And I'm going to start with you, Vaun.
I'm just, again, it was inspiring for me to see the overwhelming support from different areas. We have people all over the state in these different cities who not only, were a part of that whole George Floyd, this is wrong aura that we felt last year, but just a general support to now stand up and come forward in their communities and their cities and say, we need you guys here. These issues are going on here as well. So that camaraderie and that unifying of people all across the state on these issues is, very much so gives me hope, because this entire state has a problem. Not just the city of Milwaukee. Our people, they move out into these other places and they have to go through a lot of stuff on their own without the support of local activists or organizations. So that tying together of things like that is definitely hopeful. Also, the unifying of people who typically or over the years have worked in silos or have had different levels of success, and people who are just now stepping up. Brother David Bowen kind of inched us together as men involved in the movement to become Movement Men, which is a new group of literally the men and boys who've been involved in this work to now come together and figure out how we can galvanize other men and boys to get involved and to go out and be alternatives to police, to go out and be community first responders, to go out and be those who do the community wellness checks and ensure that we are present and visible and there in case anything is happening or has the potential to happen. That work is starting to expand and starting to become more, people are becoming more open to doing it. What I don't have hope in that I hope would change is, again, the leadership, the inability or the unwillingness to tap in and to come to the table and say, we don't have all the answers and we see what you guys are doing. How can we aid and assist? What do we need to be doing? That's an easy thing to do, is just ask the people who are out being part of the solution, coming up with the solutions, to go to them and say, what is it that you guys think we should be doing? That would be a huge thing. There have been some levels of that, but again, nowhere near to where it needs to be. But again, this past year, everything that's happened, I'm very inspired and hopeful. In us moving forward in some way, shape, form, or fashion that's going to lead this city. I'm very hopeful that we are in a time now, aside from this Chief Morales stuff, that we have a chief now, and we also have a candidate who is waiting, who both Chief Norman has shown that he is willing to take the necessary steps and to bring folks to the table and have conversations, about how to move this city forward together. I honor that because the chiefs of past have not done that. They have not. So that's a huge step.
Right.
We've seen a lot of huge steps be taken. And when those huge steps are taken, because we shouldn't have to be the person to always wave the white flag or or come to the table first. You know, the people always get demanded the most of, but again, law enforcement, elected officials, all these folks are held to higher standards, or they should be. The resident should not be held to a higher standard than any of these people that I named. So I'm hopeful in seeing the change that we've seen across the nation, in particular in Minnesota and places like that. New York, who would think that New York would move forward with going against qualified immunity and other huge steps that they, with the problems NYPD has had? What are we doing here? What are we doing in Wisconsin that is preventing us from doing something that a place with way more issues has taken? And again, these are life-saving things on both sides. Nobody wants to send anybody home for a funeral. We don't want to see law enforcement die necessarily, and we don't want to see our residents be shot and killed and mishandled and
That's right.
all of that stuff either. So again, we have no problem saying that, but that has to be reciprocated. And it is very dangerous for people to feel like any entity does no wrong, especially those with the ability to take people's lives and not be held accountable for it.
And we are going to wrap up by asking you the same question, Representative Bowen. What are you hopeful about?
Well, first off, I'm hopeful about just the energy that I'm seeing from people. Like Vaun said, there are amazing leaders in the movement that are some that have been, they got sparked like 20 years ago around the time when me and Vaun started protesting and doing some stuff in the streets. And then you have young people that I can think of in the movement right now that are in their teens and they just woke up and they are willing to do this work every day. It has been the spark that has just made them come alive for their purpose of pushing back against the system and ensuring that we don't just find incremental change, but that we get a transformed system and a transformed community and country. I'm also hopeful that I'm hearing more from law enforcement and even a couple private conversations with my colleagues, even on the other side of the aisle, that recognize how bad this situation has been to get to the point that it's at right now, and to realize that we have to do some real dramatic things to change. But right now, there are some really loud voices. And remember that there was a candidate that ran for president pretty much aiming to say that those that were fighting for justice, those that were protesting, that they should be demonized, that they should be treated in a way as criminals. And he put his whole campaign bet on that premise. And he lost that election. Donald Trump lost that election, running wholeheartedly against the Black Lives Matter movement. So it's just very clear, as I remember being in the polling site and seeing a young brother say, "Hey man, I know you from the protest," and realizing that young people and multiple generations are coming together to say we are going to get the change that we know that we are owed for the future that we want to see. And they are relentless at fighting for it. So I think that does inspire me, so that when I do run against brick walls in Madison that don't want to recognize the real root causes, when I do run into the same old opposition that has always been there for decades, as those whose shoulders I stand on have fought against, that we are in this fight. We are in this fight, and we are not opting out. We are not just giving up just because it did not happen in one legislative session in 1 year. We are committed to this fight for life.
Representative Bowen, thank you. Vaun Mays, thank you. You have been listening and watching Listen MKE Live. It's a partnership between WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, the Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Milwaukee PBS, and the Milwaukee Public Library. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you so much.
Peace.